Chapter 2. Contract, Niagraad. After a few hours, Katharina made her way out into an open valley, emerging from the small forest of dead, rotting trees she had earlier retreated into to escape that annoying little seer. How glad she was that he was gone. A gathering of shimmering gold lights observed Katharina as she left the forest, their small, human-like faces barely visible through their wondrous glow. As they watched her, they squeaked quietly to one another, but as she glanced back at them, they all cowered behind the branches. Katharina frowned.
Fairies are so weird,
She mumbled, looking down at Spirit, who snorted quietly. She sighed and looked ahead, spotting the huge city she had been traveling towards. She couldn't see much of what it looked like inside. Her view was blocked by huge 30-foot-tall walls sprouting from the ground, towering higher than any tree she had seen. Both the walls connected to each side of the mountains that surrounded the large, open area the city sat in. But despite how magnificent it looked, an ominous sense of misery lingered in the air. She then scoffed.
Not as weird as humans. Do they really think those walls are going to keep the Warlocks out?
Spirit snorted in response once again.
We'll see about that.
She smirked.
I bet I can just walk straight in without question.
The unicorn rolled her white eyes. As she made her way forward, all Katharina could think about was the seer she had met back in the valley. His stupid, annoying face was echoing around inside her head, his sentences repeating over and over, and the harder she tried to silence them, the louder they became. Not even mocking humans could distract her. However, as a quiet rumble of thunder broke through the clouds above, she shifted her attention to the small swarm of fish that had emerged from the storm clouds, making their way down from the darkening sky. She watched in fascination as a school of bright, shimmering blue fish swam down, heading towards the light emitting from the city up ahead. If there was anything Katharina liked about the cold country of Helveters, it would be the fish that swam in the skies as if it were a sea. Not too long after the thunder, small flakes of snow began to float down from above. Katharina held her hand out, allowing a snowflake to land in her palm. As it did, she frowned in concern.
Hopefully, I'll finish this werewolf contract before the snow gets too heavy for us to travel. If the sea freezes over, I'll be trapped here all throughout the cold season.
She mumbled, looking ahead again. The roads that led into the city were lined with tents, carts, and barrels. Merchants were rushing to cover their stalls as the storm crept closer by the second. The people scurried into their tents and called for their relatives. Were they afraid of the storm? Katharina frowned, realizing that all the poorly dressed and rather sick-looking people had to be refugees of the war. But what were they all doing outside the city? She didn't care to concern herself with human affairs. As she dismounted Spirit, she pulled down her hood and made her way towards the city gate, her magenta hair floating gently in the breeze. The gate to the city sat at the end of a cobblestone bridge, 2 armored guards waiting either side of the gate. Her hair shimmered with hints of red as she passed the strangely buzzing lights that lit the way along the path, sizzling wires hanging loosely around them as sparks spat savagely at her, startling Spirit.
It's okay, girl.
Katharina mumbled quietly, stroking her companion's mane.
It's just dumb human technology.
She grumbled. Gripping the unicorn's reins tightly, she approached the bridge, but stopped as she spotted a notice board up ahead. Recognizing a poster calling for the city's werewolf, she made her way over and pulled it from the board. The guards up ahead were obviously not allowing anyone into the city, so she was going to need to convince them that she wasn't a refugee, that she wasn't there to stay. Perhaps showing them the poster along with her attire would convince them that she was there for the contract, she thought. She hoped. Katharina made her way across the bridge, the guards eyeing her closely through their silver-blue helmets. They shuffled around uncomfortably, gripping their spears tightly as they glanced at one another. obviously confused by Katharina's approach. She stopped in front of them and glared up at them both, waiting. The taller guard looked over at his comrade and then looked down at her again.
You, lost your mom, kid?
He asked.
Sears all wait over there!
He said, pointing to a small camp not too far from the bridge. Katharina scowled evilly at him.
Do I look like a kid, you idiot?
She growled. Obviously, he assumed she was a seer because of her violet eyes, and as much as she wanted to scream in his face that she wasn't a seer, she couldn't exactly reveal that she was a warlock. The other guard laughed, but as Katharina sharply turned her head and glared over at him, he choked on his laughter and stood up straight.
No entry into the city. Get in line with the rest of them.
The first guard then stated, nodding in the direction of the long line of refugees waiting to get into the city.
I am not a refugee.
She frowned. Glaring at the unicorn, the second guard shrugged.
Sorry, kid. Refugee, merchant, traveler, whatever you are. There's no entry into Niagraad at the moment. If you're here to offer services as a seer, though, go wait with the seers.
Why?
She asked, looking at them both strangely, her eyes flickering with impatience.
This place is the safest city in the entire continent. Or so I've heard, anyway.
She grumbled.
I wasn't aware you leave people in need outside.
Look, kid.
The second guard sighed.
Thing is, there's too many people coming to us for help. We can only be hospitable to so many homeless people. Helvetis has turned into a breeding ground for poverty since the Warlocks cut off our supply lines. We ain't barely got shit to feed ourselves, let alone over 100 more. So get in line.
He repeated. Sighing, she held out the poster.
Do I look like some miserable homeless person to you? I'm not here for whatever they're here for.
She grumbled. The guards eyed the poster, looked her up and down, and glanced over at one another. They then both chuckled harshly, mumbling to each other. The first guard held out his hand, pinching his index finger and thumb together to mock Katharina's height as the second laughed behind his helmet.
Ah, you're here for that, huh?
He then asked doubtfully, looking down at her.
We've had dozens come by thinking they can deal with that beast, but they've all gone missing. Word of advice, lassie. Go home whilst you still can.
The second added.
Hey, there's a line here.
One of the refugees then called from behind her. Growling irritably, Katharina sharply turned her head and glared back over her shoulder at the stump-legged, one-handed man.
Mind your business!
She snapped. The refugee gasped at her response.
How rude.
He exclaimed, but as the thunder above rumbled louder, he retreated into his badly crafted wooden box of a shack. Then, the first guard sighed.
Well, sorry, miss, there are rules. Whatever you're here for, contract or not, you gotta get in line.
She glared up at the guards, clenching her fists. She didn't have time for this. She just wanted to complete this last contract, get her money, and disappear. But these two fools were trying to keep her from doing that.
Meanwhile, back near the end of the dead tree forest Katharina had emerged from not too long ago, the same masked man that had been watching from the valley was crouching on a mountain ledge, staring in her direction. Even from this distance, he could see her and hear everything she and the two guards in her way were saying. But his attention shifted to the gate. He slightly tilted his head to the side, watching, waiting. Not a single soul aware of his presence. And it was going to stay that way.
Let me through,
Katharina demanded, stepping forward. The guards both moved closer to one another, blocking her path.
Don't make us have to get physical, kid.
The second warned.
This is pathetic.
She yelled,
You got a damn werewolf running around in your city, so you put out a contract calling for help in disposing of it, and when the help arrives, you tell her to wait in line with some scabby refugees?
Hey!
The hook-handed man yelled from his shack, peeking out of his makeshift window. She rolled her eyes.
Don't make me get physical,
She warned. Still watching, the masked man smirked in amusement behind his mask.
She's reached the city.
He muttered, holding his right middle and index fingers close to where his mouth would be if it weren't for the mask.
Good.
Came the distorted voice of his commander.
Keep watching her and keep your distance.
Of course.
He replied. And then, as though he were but a specter in the wind, he faded into nothingness.
Back by the gate, both of the guards blocking Katharina's way looked over at each other again and frowned strangely.
What are you gonna do?
The first tested, laughing.
You can't reach me all the way up here.
Why you?
Before Katharina could attack, however, a familiar, annoying seer pounced out from behind the guards, his chalky brown hair floating around in the wind despite half of it being tied atop his head in a scruffy bun. He leaped over and stood between the guards and Katharina.
Hey, hey, hey!
He called, holding his hands out, keeping the two parties from fighting. The guards stopped laughing and stared at him, waiting. Looking up at him, Katharina instantly noticed his brown hair, his ridiculous sweater, and his stupid accent. She gritted her teeth.
Were you following me?
She growled. Tsunami looked back over his shoulder at her.
No. I told you, I live here.
She frowned, trying to recall him having told her that, but she hadn't really been listening to him back in the valley, so she must have missed it. Either that, or he had followed her, and this was part of some charade to gain her trust. She frowned in disgust, glaring up at him. He laughed nervously as he noticed her expression, but then looked back at the guards.
What's going on here?
The first guard called.
She was about to force entry.
Arrest her.
The second called, looking over his shoulder for backup. But Tsunami shook his head insistently.
No. It's okay. She's with me.
He claimed.
I'm not with you!
She growled in disgust, slapping his hand away as he held it out to grab her arm. The guards looked at each other unsurely before eyeing Katharina skeptically.
Oi, get in line.
Another refugee called.
Oh, shut up!
Tsunami called back, silencing him. He then looked back at the guards.
She's just joking.
He said, laughing as Katharina glared at him.
She, loves to joke around. But we're gonna go now. Big day ahead. Werewolf hunting and all. As you were.
He said quickly, moving behind Katharina. He placed his hands on her shoulders and pushed her forward, guiding her past the guards and towards the city, Spirit following curiously. Katharina did not want to go anywhere with this seer. Even if he could get her into the city, she wanted nothing to do with him.
I changed my mind. Find someone else to...
But before she could leave, Tsunami grabbed her arm and tugged her into the city.